Hello, everyone. After an extremely exciting week one, I'm thrilled to welcome back all of you to MLQ Replay. My name is Naresh Dalit, and I'm thrilled to have Nick Jablonski and Jack McGovern with me. And I'll be honest, y'all, the Friday night before opening day, I genuinely had butterflies. Post Nationals not having any quad ball for about a month had me so excited and ready to go for opening weekend, and it honestly lived up to the billing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how both of you felt for the start of the season.
Yeah, it was nice to hear you on the live stream for the New York and Washington series. I was sad that I couldn't be there in person myself. I had some family in town, and we had Cubs tickets for the exact same time. So, your commitment to quad ball was a little bit higher than mine this weekend. But I'm excited for the season. I was also, really looking forward to these games. Such, interesting matchups in week one. So excited to talk about them with both of you today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It was a great opening weekend. We didn't get the three matches that we wanted to. A little bit of rain out down in the south, but I mean, we had a phenomenal series in Detroit and Chicago, and a really interesting one with a couple of interesting adaptations from New York and Washington.
Absolutely. And I cannot wait to get into both of those series with you. But first, after a long off season and in a sport that really doesn't have an off season, in a sport that honestly routinely changes rules a lot, that's gotten a lot of critique for, I think the biggest rule change that we've seen in this sport has been the change to three max. And I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about how you saw how that impacted and changed teams' makeups, how they impacted players on the field, and how that just overall looked given the rule change.
Yeah, I mean, it was really exciting to see. It was great. It's been a long time coming. A lot of people have, really, fought for this change for a long time. Argued its case, and I hope it was validating to see it come to fruition. It created so many more opportunities for especially female and gender nonconforming players to show what they can bring to the quad ball pitch, and I think that's going to be a theme all season, and add a really new and fun wrinkle to MLQ this summer. Um, uh, you know, it's exciting that this league went forward with that option.
Yeah, I think a thing that interests me about this is one of my concerns with overall was going to be a lack of physicality or adjusting to it. And it felt like this early weekend, there wasn't that. Like teams were ready to go, teams were prepared. And that's super exciting to see from teams that are getting put together maybe 2-3 weeks before opening day. There are plenty of players who play together on all these different teams, but a team like New York, for example, it has players from all over the country at this point coming together to build this team. Like their first line may play a lot together, but in reality, it's this team is almost a mishmash of players, and to put it together in 3 weeks is super exciting.
Absolutely. And honestly, that's a perfect segue. Let's get into this New York Washington matchup. Coming into the series, New York, pretty much everyone has them as the presumed favorites to win the entire thing this summer. And they went out there and swept the Washington Admirals 3-0 with scores of 175-70, 210-90, and then 175-60 to finish it all off. And I think with this opening weekend series, we clearly saw why they were the favorites. They were crisp in their passing game. They involved everyone in their chasing game, and their beaters looked dominant throughout all three games. Jack, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you saw the Titans play this opening weekend, and just some potential breakouts that I'd love to talk about as we keep going.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. This was a performance worthy of a team, ranked number one in power rankings heading into the season. Down Josh Johnson to come in and really handle the Washington Admirals, a team that they've had trouble with in the first series of the season in past years. This was a very convincing performance from the New York Titans. The beater pair of Tate K and Tessa Mullins was, exceptional. I believe they were first in average dodgeballs, the two of them, and played really well on flag runner on pitch. And yeah, in the chaser game, some really exciting breakouts. We're going to have Ryan Leary on later for an interview. She was outstanding. She's a player that I haven't seen before as someone who pays more attention to the MLQ season than the USQ season. So really exciting to see new faces popping up in for the Titans. This is a really deep roster. I think heading into the season, I had some concerns about there were a couple names of younger players who weren't there on the Titans roster. So like Javed Cole, who had stepped into a pretty big role last year for the Titans. It seems like New York is going to have contributions up and down their roster once again.
Absolutely. And honestly, looking at that New York roster and the way they performed, there were some concerns going into this series. As you said, I had multiple conversations with multiple people that were like, oh, they don't have as much depth as they did last year. They this, they that. But then Titans came out and they started with a starting line of John Jackson, Frank Minson, Lindsey Morella, and Avery Olivar. And they quickly shut down any fears of them starting off slow. And that next line of Mo Hagag, Michael Yada Parada with Ryan Leary and Amiri Rivera Sila, I said it on the commentary, but to pair up two of the older players in the league with two of the youngest players in the league was truly a remarkable coaching decision by Tate K, newly head coach of the New York Titans. And I think that sort of combination of pairing this experience with immense youth but unbelievable potential could create a ton of really fun lines and really fun play by everyone, right? And I think we saw that with that second line specifically. But really just quick jumping back into that first line, I think Frank Minson popped off, absolutely popped off. And the reason why I specifically bring up Frank Minson was because all of last year, he was the head coach. Obviously, when you're a playing head coach, it's difficult to try to manage everything and play at the same time. Last year, he had 13 goals, 4 assists, 5 stops. This year, after 3 games, he's already at 9 goals, 2 assists, 4 stops. That's pretty much an entire season of production in the span of 3 games. And if they can unlock Frank Minson and actually utilize Frank Minson's potential, I don't even want to say potential, but if we're going to be honest, he hasn't really chased since the 2019-2020 season for NYU. And at that season, he was one of the best Northeast chasers in the country. And the fact that they have him coming back and actively chasing full time should really be exciting for what New York wants to do going into the rest of the summer. Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how the influx of younger players and the additions of older talent combined with these younger players help Titans going forward.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be honest. It's so much easier to play when you're not thinking about anything else, right? Like Frank Minson had to think about so much last year on top of whatever he had to do in the quadball game at this point, right? Like there's so much. Even if you're on the field in that moment, there's something you have to think about. I can speak from experience that it's so much easier to be a non-playing coach in this league. And this is a league that punishes mistakes. And it's a league where even the lower end teams are good enough that if you make a coaching mistake or you play a line too long or you leave someone out there for 1 minute too long, these teams will find that weakness and attack it. And kudos to Tate K for taking on that role and trying to be a playing coach. But watching Frank Minson just play is such an exciting thing to see because it's like you said, Naresh, it's something we haven't seen for years. Talking about this team as a whole, like this isn't the final Titans team, right? We're missing Josh Johnson. Devin Lee is only going to get better. Devin Lee is a name we always forget about in the USQ season because he doesn't play the USQ season. And he comes out here and I'm not going to say he didn't dominate, because let's be honest, Devin Lee, even at 60%, is going to be an all-world talent. But once Devin Lee gets up to speed, this team is going to have fireworks in the beating core.
Absolutely, and that's not even including Jason Ng, who was not rostered for this weekend. But also the return of Rachel Ayala Silver looks like she's been healthy for the first time in a really long while. Right, last year was her first year back MLQ after a torn ACL. As someone who has had a torn ACL, it takes a while for you to come back and get there mentally. And for Rachel to be Ayala Silver to come back and just get some drives in there. I think she had close to 20 drives played over the course of these games, and just that's the benefit of being a Titan, where you have so much depth that you can play through, and you don't need to play high stress minutes for every single beater. And then going off of that, when it comes to beating, this is where this is gonna be a terrible segue. I apologize. Going into the beaters though, let's talk about the opposite. Their counterparts in the Washington Admirals. We saw the Adrian Koretsky and Colin Bourne, two of the younger players in MLQ, have to step up and take over their coaching for the Admirals with the loss of Trina Hicks, Bernie Burgess, Melissa Smith, Zane Bila. And so Adrian Koretsky and Colin Bourne have had the tough task of taking over leadership while also helping the younger beaters on this squad get up to the MLQ level. And so, Jack, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you saw from this younger beater talent from Admirals, who in the last couple of weeks have been told that maybe they're not ready for this MLQ experience just yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. They faced a tough task in this series. And, losing, Bernie Burgess, Katrina Hicks, Melissa Smith, Cody Nardone, like, those are huge losses for the Admirals franchise, maybe even bigger and more impactful than the losses of Rachel Heald, Tyler Trudeau, Julia Baer. And I think it shows why, you need to be developing beating talent, years in advance. And the Admirals were doing that, to an extent with Koretsky and Bourne and Rob Rice, but they needed to have been doing more over the past few years, at least for this first series of the season. There's a lot of time left, a lot of room for improvement, but they're going to have to figure out ways to compete with very good beaters in their division. I mean, Charlotte and Boston are no slouches in the beating game. So one specific thing that I saw that I think that they can do is just guard against tap beats of the point defenders a little bit better. Washington at their best has some really great point defenders, and New York was really good at taking that space and using tap beats to free up their drivers and make things easy at the point of attack. So I think work to be done for Washington in the beating game.
Absolutely, but I think something that you said that Keegan Remy Miller and I in the commentary really highlighted in game one. A lot of the chasers, point defenders specifically, that are on the Admirals are very, very happy point defending, and they don't usually hoop defend. And that's such a interesting dynamic. Having been someone that always plays point, always up top, to then shifting to hoops, such as we saw Brian Mulcahy do. That level. I know it's only a few feet playing from top of the keeper zone to the to exactly at hoops. That level of movement is very different for people that are not used to it, and so that's something that we'll have to see as how the Admirals develop that as they keep going forward. Because as of right now, the only real hoop defenders they have are the Shane McConaugheys, the Andrew Bowmans, who, let's be honest, didn't have the best of series this past weekend. Nick, I'd love to hear what your thoughts about what this Admirals team can do to make some adjustments, potentially take advantage of the fact that they still are extremely physical 1 through 30.
This team is young. I mean, this team, we've talked about it. There's some older names on there, right? The David Littletons, the Brian Mulcahy's of the world. But this is a team that has to figure out how to play in the MLQ meta at this point. And it's a team that will need to figure out those adjustments that you both have talked about. I mean, Justin Kramer didn't play MLQ last year, and Justin Kramer is arguably one of the stronger point defenders. Brian Mulcahy is one of the stronger point defenders. This is the team that needs to, I think, lean into those strengths just to make sure that rather than trying to play, this team isn't going to match a Boston beater core right now or a New York beater core or the Celine Richard, Cody LeBove pair of Charlotte at this point. What they're going to need to do is they're going to need to lean into their strengths and play to force the other team to make mistakes, right? New York is a team that is happiest when they are able to execute what they want to execute. When you make them make mistakes and you play either mistake-free quad ball or you just play such chaotic quad ball that the other team has to do something off script, that's where this Washington team is going to find success. And I think it might be more in the forced chaos aspect of things because a New York team is so disciplined. This Boston team has plenty of disciplined players and beaters that love to create chaos. So I think you need to push them to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and if I could just add to, add one point on the Washington offense. I think, Naresh, you're right that they really have to get Shane McConaughey and Andrew Bowman a little bit, more involved. It was a quiet weekend for both of them as, ball carriers. And I think the Admirals were best when they were playing a little bit more direct. On the plus side, I thought it was a great weekend for their female and gender nonconforming chasers. Julia Rankin, Liz Stone had some, just awesome finishes around the hoops. They were facilitating, really well. That seems to be less of a problem for Washington than maybe I had thought heading into the season, with losing Rachel Hield and Julia Baer.
Absolutely. And I think going off of that, the fact that Jeanette High was someone who, as we talked about, point defenders, they were always one of the first people to be at the point of attack on defense. Anytime that New York wanted to run a transition, they would always have to go through Jeanette first. And I think that sort of hustle, that sort of effort is something that can't be taught. And so if this Admirals team continues going into and playing with that effort, because more often than not into this summer specifically, it looks like they will be the underdog. But yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to see what this Admirals team can build towards because you don't win championships in June. Benepe Cup is in August. And so this is a team for me that looked very inconsistent, but they had their moments where they had streaks of being able to put stuff together, and now it's just being able to do it a bit more consistently. And talking about consistency, let's go into our interview with Ryan Leary, a first-year player an MLQ rookie for this 2024 season for the New York Titans. Ryan, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It was so let me actually start this a few weeks ago. Post Nationals first weekend, it was New York Titans tryouts. I had so many people reach out to me and be like, Ryan Leary absolutely popped off. And I was like, I don't know who that is. And quickly you made yourself known this past weekend, where every single time I saw you touch the ball, I saw you on the field, you were always doing something productive, always doing something very efficient. And I asked this to Nick and Jack. They've been around forever. I would love to ask you, how did you feel going into your first ever MLQ series? How did you feel the night before, even pre-game, first time practicing, playing against all of these Titans players and so much talent in this New York area?
Definitely going into the games, I was nervous because having only played like 1 year of college quad ball, I didn't really know what to expect. And the game, practicing a little bit, I've just it's a whole different game pretty much. Like it's faster, people are bigger, and so I was a little nervous, but honestly, when I step onto the field, it kind of goes away, and I just kind of get focused and lost in the game. Yeah.
Ryan, take me back for our viewers who are just getting to know you. Like, what what brought you to quadball? What brought you to MLQ this summer? Just curious to hear.
Well, what brought me to quadball? I was a big Harry Potter fan, so I knew Quidditch growing up, and then actually Amiri on the Titans, who I'm teammates with at Emerson. I met them my first week at school, and they just brought up quadball, and I thought it would be fun, so I showed up, and it turned out it's pretty good, so I just kept playing, and then there's more. I wanted to play more quadball, and over the summer, that MLQ is there, so I wanted to keep playing.
How do you feel like so far MLQ has been different from USQ? Are there skills that you feel like you've been able to bring over? Are there just aspects of the game that are on a completely different level? What's your experience in making that goal to move to MLQ?
Well, I feel like in college, I feel like the thing I got down for pretty well was my shooting, just taking shots from not dunking or driving in, but outside a few feet away from the hoops. But I feel like I've had to switch into not shooting as much, especially with taller players and just more skilled, bigger players overall. Even in practice, I can't shoot, or the Saturday before our games, I took 2 shots and Don Jackson blocked them both. So I had to figure out what to do. I can't shoot. It's my go-to weapon in college, but it's not always going to be there in MLQ.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen John on the sideline. He will stop anything and everything. His wingspan is nuts. But hey, the confidence to shoot, just let it rip sometimes is what you need, and that's such a hard skill set to develop in the first place. So the fact that you are willing to shoot is amazing. And honestly, the confidence with how you moved on the field was one of the first things that really stood out to me watching you play and commentating. And I think a play that I just will not forget will be the play where you were surrounded by Riley Stars, and I think it might have been Julia Rankin on Admirals. You were completely surrounded. Ball is on the ground. You picked up a ball and just launched it all the way to the top of the field for a soft reset, essentially, so that the offense can just slow it down and run it again, and you all scored off of it. That sort of game sense, that sort of quad ball IQ is extremely difficult to develop after a year of playing, and yet you're right there. You're playing like a veteran out there. Did you have any sports backgrounds that you were pulling from, or was this you're just out here going off the 1 year you had and just playing as hard as you can?
Growing up, I played basketball. So that's, I mean, quadball, especially in the chaser game, it's similar to basketball. So I feel like that I can get it was easy to transfer that to cutting and off ball movement, on ball movement, setting screens, all that.
And for the rest of the season, I mean, are there any particular games you're looking forward to, or challenges that you're hoping to meet later on in the season? Any personal goals for the rest of the season?
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to playing Boston, especially going to Boston playing, because Emerson's in Boston. I spent the whole USQ season all through spring in Boston. And obviously our coach for Boston, for Emerson, Kieran, is on Forge. A lot of people I know and honestly look up to in the quadball game are on Forge. So I'm really excited to see them in action and play against them.
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful time in your first year with MLQ and with the Titans, and I am very excited to see how you continue to progress in not just this summer, but as you keep playing with Emerson. Thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Perfect. And so thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us. And now with the next series, this series was, I think a lot of people, as we get into this, a lot of people messaged me about this. And in conversation, everyone said the same thing. Detroit versus Chicago. This early in the season is a disservice to everyone. And I agree, because this was, 3 weeks into the season? Harvard graduated a few weeks ago, so I know Leo Fried coming into the mix really had people wondering how well he would fit in, how well everything would go. But this was a team that went in. They, in a downpour in Chicago, they went in, made game one really close with a 1-5 loss, but they ended up winning 105-60, and then Chicago pulled through with the series win 140-105. Jack, Nick, I'd love to hear what y'all's thoughts were about Detroit going into this preseason, especially. Real quick, as we start progressing into the Chicago-Detroit series, I did want to take a brief timeout for technical issues. We will be right back. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I apologize, but we cleared everything up. Everything should be okay. But I did want to get into the Chicago-Detroit series. It was the second series of the weekend. Chicago ended up winning 2-1, but the early season storylines were how well Leo Fried was going to come back into this Detroit Innovators roster, and how good this Innovators roster could be just so early into the season. And we quickly found out, right? With 105, Chicago won. 105-60, Detroit won, which gave us a rubber match in game 3, which started off kind of scary for Innovators, but really turned into a game, and with Chicago pulling through 140-105. Jack, Nick, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts this series went, and how you thought Detroit looked with so much expectations coming into them for this early in the season.
Yeah, the weather was messy, but this was an instant classic. To set the stage, Chicago, coming off a second place finish in MLQ last summer, the Boom Train Corps coming off a national championship in the USQ club division, the first ever for a Midwest-based team, and Detroit, reinforced with some, new old additions, namely Leo Fried coming off, a college national championship in USQ of his own. And, we got everything that we could have wanted. This series was close. This series was competitive, tough, lots of drama. And Detroit got, its first, probably its best win in franchise history, I would say. And Chicago avoided what would have been a really embarrassing, opening series loss. Not to take anything away from Detroit. This Detroit team is very good, and I think we're going to see that, the rest of the season. But a team with a core coming off, a national championship and, a second place finish is not supposed to, play this tight. Against a Detroit team that's been a cup below in past seasons, I'll say.
Yeah, I was super excited to see this Detroit team come out. One of my takes on this was that 6 out of 10 times Detroit wins this division, and I still stand by that take. I think there's probably a majority of times, given the excitement that we saw in this first week, that MLQ maybe plays a little bit with the schedule and pushes this series a little bit later, gives Leo Fried more than 6 days, 7 days to figure out how to mesh with this team. Because if this is the Leo Fried we see coming back into this Detroit team, with a healthy Julian Toryakov also being a huge comeback for this team. Last year, Toryakov wasn't a factor for this Detroit team. And we can see the impact he has on the field, left, right, and center through the whole time. I think that this is a team that we also, I mean, we're talking to her a little bit later, but Ryan and Ray, it's so refreshing to see them playing together again. It's super exciting to see this team. For how young this team is, we often forget that Leo Fried is under 24. I don't know if he's 23 or 22, but he is young as well. This is a team that's full of young talent that was able to give a very senior, very disciplined Chicago team a scare.
Absolutely. And I think with the way the series went, Detroit quickly showed that they were not going to be punked. First play of the game, first goal of the series was Liam Zock on a pick and roll, finished on the small hoop with authority, and yet Detroit never felt like they were out of the game ever. And I think the biggest thing for me watching this series was the fact that Detroit went down. Forget about game one, forget about game two. Congrats, game two, Detroit won. But I think the biggest thing about the character of this team was the fact that they went down 8-0, and then they slowly started to chip away. Sometimes they didn't get a good call. Calls were missed, so on and so forth. But they never stopped competing at a high level. And I think for such a young team, and I think looking at the rosters, as Nick was saying, Kansas City is the second youngest team. Everyone said Kansas City was the youngest team. Detroit is the youngest team. I think the average age was 22.7. KC was 22.9. So we're looking at extreme youth from this Innovators team, but they played with a ton of poise because when you go down 8-0 after you just won a game off of one of your biggest rivals, you could just say, hey, we got one. We're good with this. But they never gave up. And I think watching this team, watching the players go out there and compete, I'm very excited to see what they can do I'm very excited to see what they can do going forward. And so I really want to highlight specifically off of last summer was Gwen Pratt and Lindsay Smyers. Watching these two, it's truly amazing how much they're always in the right spots. They're always making the right decisions, more than just being in the right position. They know what to do once they get the ball. Right. And that decision making is extremely hard to develop. And the fact that these two young players have it in spades and are able to be very productive out there is those two, if you don't know who they are, you have to, because these two are absolutely phenomenal. And then, I mean, Nick, you said it, Ryan and Ray, the beater pair that everyone will talk about, everyone should talk about, because they're absolutely phenomenal. But I think the beater pair last year with Ryan and Ray only was difficult, where they would, I think in the New Orleans series at MLQ Champs, they played close to 80% of the game, 90% of the game. But this year, it looked like the beater pair of Brooke Smiley and David Banis really were able to step up and really play to parity at points against the Chicago Beaters, who have a lot more experience and the Chicago team was the favorites going into this North Division series. So I'm very excited to see how all of this depth plays together for this team in particular. And all of that being said, I know we talked a lot, but the biggest thing that this Detroit team has is the fact that they can shorten a game with Neil Peterson going in during flag runner on pitch and is an immediate catch. That skill set, and the fact that they don't even need Leo Fried to go out there, they can have Leo out there. They can keep Peterson out there, and they can have Ethan Wanos out there, who caught in game 3. Absolutely amazing skill set for this Detroit team to have. Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, when you're starting a game with a 35-point advantage, it makes everything else a lot easier, especially considering that they didn't have to integrate Leo Fried into the seeking game at all. One of the biggest things that gets overlooked is beater-seeker chemistry, and that's a hard thing to integrate. That's not something you get in 6 days. That's not something you get in 6 months, if we're being honest. That takes a lot of time to develop, and having Neil Peterson there for the entirety of the preseason, as we'll call it, definitely paid in spades for this Detroit team. You don't have to sell me on Brooke Smiley, Naresh. We know what I think of Brooke. But I think that you are right, it does open something up. The fact that Ryan and Ray don't have to play 80-90% of the minutes means that they can go 80, 90% for the 40%, 50% of minutes they have to play. And that's unlocking something entirely different in this Detroit team. This Detroit team looked decisive. Even the plays that weren't successful had a clear idea of what was happening. This isn't the Detroit team that's going to huck up a shot just because they can, even though there's no shot clock. It looked like a lot of times last year they were just throwing up prayers at the end of a shot clock. This was a team that in the rain looked decisive, and that's a really difficult thing to do. A lot of the top teams don't look great in the rain, and this Detroit team was able to push a very disciplined Chicago team because they were decisive when they needed to be.
Yeah, just to echo, some points that you guys have made. I thought, Ray Boror, who we're going to talk to in a second, in particular, was just outstanding in the historic win over Chicago in Game 2. Forced a turnover early in a tight game that led to a goal. Was on the field, bubbling when the flag runner was caught. Helped clear out the beaters on the final possession. So just some really big contributions at key moments from a Team USA Development Academy player. Living up to the moment, 100%. I'll add, Neil Peterson, wow. We named him as a player to watch heading into the series, lived up to the hype there. Some, players that I saw that stood out to me that I didn't know heading into the series, Ashton Glenn and Brady Sowers. They look like they're going to be really big contributors on offense for the Innovators. So, exciting to see this Innovators team really rounding out, the fight back from 8-0. That's something that we've seen of like championship level teams like the Chicago Prow last year or the Washington Admirals at recent MLQ championships. So really impressive performance. This team is legit.
Absolutely. And talking about 8-0 runs, let's go into that Game 2 where Detroit ended up winning. They were actually down 6-2 by the time the catch was made by Neil Peterson. That catch plus goal took them to a +4 swing, and then they went on a 4-0 run to clinch the game. And that sort of, again, toughness is truly remarkable for a team that young. And then on the flip side, let's talk about Chicago. They came into the series super short rostered. It was no Riley Andrews, huge contributor for the Boom Train season. No Ali Manzella, an assistant coach and another huge contributor. No DME, Team USA player, and was not on Boom Train, but obviously you saw what DME did for Chicago last year. And Ben Peachy, who is instrumental key for what they want to do in the Chaser game. Having said all of that, their stars still showed up to play. Nathan Digman balled out 11 goals, 9 assists, 14 stops, nearly put up a triple-double in the series. And I think the biggest thing is the fact that it was pouring and he was still able to shoot extremely well was truly remarkable to see. And also being able to run those fast breaks and make those passes on those fast breaks to a cutting Matt Melton, to a cutting Chaser who was making that third run. Phenomenal plays by the stars that showed out when they needed to be. And I think the biggest thing that really popped off, especially with the rain, especially with a team that is more inclined to pass the ball with how good their passing has been. In the rain, I did see some bounced passes. I did see so on and so forth. But again, in the rain, it's very tough to play on. But I think the biggest thing when you're playing in those tough inclement weathers is the fact that the hustle and effort on the defensive end will really still keep you in games. And I think we saw that in spades with Liam Zock, who really contained a Julian Torikoff and a Leo Fried. Jack, Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how Chicago came out. Even though, again, short roster, they still pulled off, and we gave all these props to Detroit. But let's go. I mean, we gave all these props to Detroit, but Chicago still ended up winning the series. So I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts.
Yeah, ditto on everything you said about Nathan Digman. This was a performance worthy of a star, worthy of, a veteran leader. Just the way Digman pushed the pace, was shooting lights out, against a really good defense, a tall defense, around the hoops. Like you wouldn't think, there was a window on a lot of those shots, but Digman found it. This was, U.S. national team level performance from Nathan Digman, USQ champion now, the leader of this Chicago Prow squad. I'll also, throw a shout out to Matt Melton, who just had an excellent series behind the hoops, scored 10 goals. Was that like release valve for a lot of the time? A player been really trust. They've been playing together so long. A really turn back the clock like vintage performance from Melton. And then Zach, containing Freed and Toyarkov, with just excellent tackling. They were really key to the Prowl's performance defensively, and once again showed what an important player they are. Really exciting from the Prow to be able to get through this difficult series, with the win ultimately.
Yeah, I think this is a team that I think is obviously very strong at the top. I think it's a team that we have to discuss. There seem to be some depth issues on this team across the board, and there seem to be some question marks about who's going to do the scoring besides the Digmans and the Meltons of the world in this case. I do think that they're going to have to figure something out, and that might be figured out by the return of Riley Andrews, right? And DME and Ben Peachy and Ali Menzel. All four of them are phenomenal with the ball in their hands. And that's a second line right there, right at a certain level. You can do that if you need to. You have that. And then to talk about it, on the beating side of things, Noyes Osra and Tad Walters had the highest plus minus by a mile for this. They were both, Noyes was plus 14 and Walters was plus 12. And then after that, it's a bit of a drop off in this beater core as to who's going to step up. And now I'm not saying that they can't step up with that, but it is a question of who's going to with this. There's not a clear second pair. We talk about Detroit, right, with the Smiley Banis second pair opportunity. And I'm very curious to see where the Chicago team finds their next line, essentially, right? Line one, phenomenal, top tier, but it takes more than one line to win an MLQ championship. It takes more than one line to make it to the semifinals of an MLQ championship. This is a team that I think, while their highs are incredibly, incredibly high, they are going to have to figure out some lows.
And with that, I think this is the perfect time to go into our interview. Joining us is Ray Boror from the Detroit Innovators, who we are very excited to have. Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So Ray, I've asked every single person so far. This is your third season coming into MLQ.
Yes.
Now you are seen as a leader. You are an assistant coach. You are looking at, you're running this beater line. How does that make you feel, one? And how did you feel going into this opening series as compared to maybe previous years?
In terms of coaching, I would say I'm getting a lot more comfortable with the coaching role. I did it for Michigan for the last 2 years. So at least for a lot of the Michigan players, I have known them for a long time. I've played with them, so I'm comfortable giving feedback. It's still a little new to kind of be like, oh, now I'm also doing that to some of the older players, but I think I've gotten some good experiences over the last couple of years, opportunities with like the developmental academy, and also just opportunities going to different tournaments that I don't think Michigan in the past had really been going to, just to sort of be exposed to different playing styles and different coaching methods. So I think in terms of coaching, I'm getting more and more comfortable, learning different styles of play and offering feedback to different people that's very personalized depending on what they have been exposed to and sort of how they want to develop themselves as a player. And then leading that into like going into our series, I was feeling pretty confident because on one hand, you say we're the youngest team in the league, which is definitely true. It's a lot of college players, a lot of college kids. But I think that we've done a really good job the last month really prepping for Chicago. we really knew sort of what strategy we expected them to come out with and how we wanted to counter that. And I think all of the coaches and all of the players did a great job really internalizing that and all focusing strategies, learning how to work together, both individually and as lines, as like teammates. And I was feeling really good. And, I think it kind of showed. We had a close game 1 and 3, and we even took game 2. So it goes to show that our hard work really paid off.
Yeah, Ray, let's talk about that big game 2 win. How do you think it came together for you guys, and what did a win like that mean for you, for the franchise as a whole, the team, your teammates? Would love to talk about that game.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is how I felt personally, but at the end of game 1, I remember feeling a kind of strong mix of emotions, because on one hand I was like pretty upset that we hadn't won, especially such a close game with only 2 goals being the difference. And it was wet, it was slippery. If calls had maybe gone a different way or people had just made a different choice, you always rethink those moments, right? And so on one hand I was a little upset, but on the other hand I was like, compared to our series last year against Chicago, this is leagues better, even compared to some club teams playing like Boom Train, for example, or anything like that. Like, we are so close, like we are in this. And then going into game 2, really seeing everyone internalize that. And like you said earlier, people didn't really let it get to them. Everyone had, head held high, really strong mindset. I also think we changed the lines a little bit to prioritize different things that we saw were working really well in game 1. We started putting Julian and Leo on a chasing line together because we saw their chemistry, which we hadn't had as many opportunities to see at practice just because of, unfortunately, the Harvard school schedule and everything. But I think going into game 2, everyone had a positive mindset, and it was really so meaningful to see our plans be actualized, right? And to have a pretty big win too over a team that made it into the semifinals last year. We were up, I think 45 was the final score. And so that is a huge thing, especially for our franchise, where in previous years we weren't necessarily competitive with Chicago or Indianapolis in the past. And now to know that, hey, we can hang with them, and this is at the start of the season, right? So our ceiling is only going to be higher.
Absolutely. So I actually have a question going off of game 2, right? You won, you super high. You're coming off of an intense high, probably the best win in franchise history. You immediately go down 8-0. You call it early time 3-0 or 4-0, and walk me through that timeout. Walk me through that huddle. Walk me through that thought process of wild. We just went down 4-0 immediately, and then now you call a timeout, and then the onslaught still continues. Now it's 5-0, 6-0, and it goes up until 8-0. Walk me through that thought process about what you were thinking, what the team was thinking potentially, and then being able to then bounce back from that 8-0 to really make it a competitive game toward the end.
Yeah. I would say that the big thing with the timeout was us sort of trying to keep our cool, right? Understanding like, hey, Chicago was giving this really high press, but we've practiced this. We knew this was what was going to happen coming in. We've prepped for this. We just have to figure out what have they changed between games 2 and 3, and what have we changed between game 2 and 3 to make sure that we're responding well to this press. And so we took a timeout just to sort of reaffirm, like, we have been practicing for this. We know how to deal with it. And I think it took a few more possessions in game to really figure out what sort of adjustments we needed on our end to actually successfully beat that press and sort of get back into Chicago having a set defense and us being able to get those good scoring opportunities. I know the big thing that worked for us was switching to a diamond instead of a box, just to have those pass options for chasers up top and also give beaters a little more time to react to the pressure that Chicago is facing us. But I think, once again, everyone on the team was very strong mentally to handle that. And once we had that first goal and it became 8-1, like, that's all you need, right? You just need that momentum shift. And then it's so easy to essentially do the same thing back to the other team, right? We went on a 5-0 run and ended the start of flag runner on pitch at 50-80, which is a totally in-game, like, yeah, we're totally in range for that game, especially when you have a seeker like Neil or Ethan Wannis, who is an automatic catch.
Ray, I'm curious, what you guys, like, as a team, like, have highlighted, after this series is, like, areas that you're really encouraged by, like, areas that, you're like want to work on, heading into the, next couple series? Like, what were some of those conversations after the series like that you guys had as a team?
Yeah, I would say some of the conversations were focusing on that game two when our plan actually worked and we were able to hold Chicago and even beat them. Be like, hey, we planned going in that we wanted a low scoring series. We wanted to be in range because we know that we can get a snitch catch and that can put us ahead and give us the win. And we really tried to focus on the fact that, hey, our plan worked. We held Chicago to 60 points in one game, and in the most they scored was 140. That's a pretty low scoring game by quadball standards, especially for a 30-minute series, 30-minute game for all three for the full series, right? And so I would say that was one thing we really focused on was just, hey, our plan worked. It was still early on. We haven't all been practicing together that long. We've only had a couple of weeks, especially coming from so many different college and club programs, and really trying to emphasize that against Chicago, which sort of has that more, I guess, cohesiveness because a lot of them come from Boom. Even their college programs, I know, get to on occasion practice with Boom Train just because of the region that they're in. So all of those players have been, playing with each other. They've been teammates for ages. They just came off a national championship and a semifinal run in last year's MLQ season. And for us to really bring it to them in this game two and throughout the whole series, really trying to emphasize that and the positive mindset. And then, we're still waiting to see the Toronto-Cleveland series next week to really know what we need to be focusing on for the future because our Toronto series is less than a month away now.
And so, Ray, I'm going to leave you with two questions.
Okay.
First question, where do you think the ceiling is for Detroit this season?
I mean, I think, like you said, Naresh, I think it was an injustice that our Chicago series was first because I think if we had more time to practice together, I think we could have taken it. I'm with Nick Jablonski, but I'm more than 6 out of 10 times. I'm like 7, 8 out of 10 times, right? Because I think that we have the talent, we have the drive. Our chasing game is elevated from last year. Our seeking game is elevated from last year. We've got pretty similar beating core. Like, I think that we had more time to prepare, had more time to really be a cohesive unit, that we could have taken game one off of Chicago in addition, or game three, right? But that might just be me wanting to make myself feel better. But I think the ceiling is we could easily be second in the division at this point, right? I think we could beat Minneapolis if we prep well and play the way that we were playing this past weekend, or better than this past weekend. And I think the rest of the North, like, I think they're up for grabs. Like, I think we can easily finish second.
I completely agree. And my final question for you, Ray. Last year, I came up to watch the Minneapolis-Detroit series in Minneapolis. We were sitting in Amanda Margulis's truck.
Yes, we were.
Right, like waiting through that. Again, that was another rain delay over there. And I just remember talking to you, Ryan, Amanda, and I think there was one other person. Oh, it was Jack Butler, I think. And I just remember there was a Fast Break News article that had been posted, and y'all were talking about, oh, we got mentioned. Detroit was, or like one of our players was mentioned. And even just a slight mention was enough to see how excited y'all got. Now y'all are the talk of the town. How does that make you feel? And going off of the previous question, talk about the ceiling. How do y'all temper those expectations and really play to yourselves instead of letting that pressure potentially get to you?
I would say it feels great because for me personally, this is my third year playing for Detroit, right? And so I would say the difference between my first year and now, and how MLQ and Fast Break News are sort of talking about us, is drastically different, because I feel like my first year playing for Innovators, like you said, we kind of were a lower tier team. We weren't really playing as well. We had a lot of new players. We had a new head coach with Kagan Madeline. And so there was a lot of turnover. And to see that over the past 3 years, you've seen a lot of returners, you've seen some new players from different college programs, and really getting to see how all of us have come together to become more cohesive and then are getting those shout outs, right? And so I think that feels great to really see the result of all of that hard work, this years of hard work from everyone, both club and college players alike. And then in terms of tempering expectations, I think you always have to remember that we did lose this series. So yeah, we took game 2 off Chicago, but there's always room for improvement. they went on that 8-0 run. How do we prevent other teams from replicating that? How do we make sure that we're not getting too big for our britches and that we're really focused and set on how we are going to approach our next series and make sure that we play some good, clean quad ball.
Ray, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You are someone that I've always admired from a distance. I've seen your work in Michigan. I've seen you play for DA, and now I'm seeing you lead this Detroit team, and I'm very excited to see how far y'all can go. Thank you again so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And with that, that wraps up MLQ Replay Week 1. I know there were some technical difficulties. I know I'm extremely nervous, but thank you all so much for joining us today. Next week, we have Boston versus Charlotte in Boston, Toronto versus Cleveland in Toronto, and our series of the week will be San Antonio versus Kansas City Stampede in San Antonio. So join us next week, same time on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. On the MLQ Network. Thank you all so much.